This is a piece by a guy named Larry Taunton.
Larry who? Never heard of her.
What sort of a man is he?
Pick from Bama.
A man like any other, but more so.
Well, I thought he was dead.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show. Let's light this candle.
Welcome into the Larry Alex Taunton Show. I am Amie Beth Shaver. This is your man in the field. And in the field today, we're talking about something very important. Of course, we're going to talk about the election, but we're also going to talk about something that's near and dear to our hearts. And I don't know if everybody's ready for this discussion. I don't know. But how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. I'm doing very well after some interesting travel, and I think you had a little bit of your own. So, yes. Lay it on me. What's on your mind?
Biscuits.
Biscuits.
All right. I mean, biscuits. And now, look, we are in the American South. I understand that. And there are places that, as you mentioned this morning, serve sad biscuits.
Yes.
But there are places that we think serve delicious biscuits. Yes. And I said, and you did not disagree with me. So I'm very interested in our fabulous audience and our listeners letting us know where their favorite biscuits are. Yeah. This could turn into a tour, you understand, of their favorite biscuits. But there's a place in Birmingham, and I didn't know they did this. Like, I didn't even know, where they slice the biscuits, they drench them in butter.
I'm already in.
You know where this is.
No,
and then
I don't.
They grill them. They grill them and then put them on your plate with the most perfect scrambled eggs you've ever had.
Is this Dimitri's?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Dimitri's. And I think Dimitri's just has one location, right?
Yeah, I think they just have one. I don't know. I'm usually the last person to find out about things.
Dimitri's, for those who are listening, in Birmingham, Alabama, there's a barbecue spot in downtown Homewood called Dimitri's. But Dimitri's, unlike most barbecue places, serves breakfast.
Yes. And
they serve a great breakfast. I'm all in on that. You know, the biscuit, it's interesting to me because the biscuit is really uniquely Southern. And like barbecue, which is uniquely Southern, I would argue, those who are not in the South misuse the words barbecue and biscuit. They'll call a bun barbecue. They'll call sloppy Joe, they'll call a bun a biscuit, or anything, bready that you would eat in the morning. And they'll call a sloppy Joe barbecue.
Yeah, which is not
barbecue.
That's sloppy Joe. That's from the North.
It's
bless you. I love sloppy Joes, but that's not barbecue.
It's a bless you moment. It is so true. And real biscuits, and I feel like the art is being lost just a little bit. Like when I was growing up, we were talking about this in the break room upstairs, but
it's a very fancy break room.
Yes, a very, very fancy break room. But when I was growing up, a lot of the moms, they made homemade biscuits.
They knew they understood the assignment.
They knew how to make them, and I had this is so funny how you think as a kid, but I'd be thinking I'm spending the night at so and so's house this weekend. His mom, she makes the best biscuits, or she makes the best fried chicken, or whatever, and you that factored into your decision as to where you went. And so you had favorite moms, dads were kind of irrelevant because they were almost never home. And, moms were the caregivers.
That's right.
And they were the ones who, did or didn't let you do anything and this kind of stuff. But the biscuit, I can think of Martha Carter, she's still out there. One of my mom's dear friends, her son was a very dear friend of mine.
Send biscuits.
She could make biscuits. A woman by the name of Donna Jimenez. Oh, wow. Her biscuits. The best.
I mean, what can you say? I told you, and you didn't laugh at me because this is the way I judge if people take their biscuit seriously. I said, I think they're going to be served at the wedding supper of the Lamb. Like, I think Jesus, when we get there, he's going to be like,
why not?
First of all, we're going to fall down. We're going to be so excited we're there.
And
then he's going to go, here. Oh, and then my husband talks about his lowlies, so his great-grandmother's ability to make his grandmother's ability to make these little things. And please, when I say this, you'll know what I'm saying because it's the American South. Hoe cakes or griddle cakes made with the cornbread and then fried them up nice and thin, slathered. Not just in butter.
I like the word slathered.
Slathered, but they were baked in lard and then slathered with butter. So I, being the newlywed wife, this is many moons ago.
Yeah. He gives you the recipe book and says, you must learn this.
Yeah, you got to learn how to do these. And so one night I thought, oh, he's had a really hard week. I will make his lowlies little things. And he was so sweet. And I was like, it's not it, isn't it? He was like,
but
no.
have you mastered it now?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
No. Isn't it a funny thing? Because
But I can make good cornbread.
Yeah, I
can make good cornbread.
Requires a
lot of
cast
butter.
iron.
Cast iron, butter, and love.
Pan.
Yeah.
But yes, it was funny because my grandmother on my dad's side, she's Southern, very Southern, Tallahassee, Alabama.
Oh, my word.
My grandmother could make the best cornbread, pound cake, and fried chops.
Stop.
And my mom mastered them all. My mom is maybe even has outdone her on the pound cake now. But the golly, growing up with that stuff, I know you guys are ready for us to get to something more substantive.
But food, and as you're driving down the road, but let me just say that my grandmother and mother were the queens of the pie.
Okay.
And that was their specialty.
I always got the impression that pie crust was hard.
It is very hard. It is very hard to do. And that was the signature of the ladies in my family was pie and the crust, whether it was banana cream or chocolate.
Are they still living?
My grandparents are not. But my mom and her sisters are. And so at Thanksgiving and Christmas, this is when they throw down with the pie. And so coming into our house.
So they've mastered it.
They've mastered it.
Okay, then I have a request. That banana cream that you just mentioned.
Now, you know what? Banana cream is my fave.
I am putting in an order right now
Done.
For banana cream. I can
attempt.
I have not met her, but I just want to say in advance, I like her very much.
Listen, I'm telling you.
Banana cream is awesome.
Because it was, we were from the north and moved south when I was an infant. And so there are things that we brought with us. And it was the pie. And my grandparents moved south. And so they could throw down. But the joke is around our family is kids would come over and they may not get anything for breakfast because I told you I made sad biscuits and put too much baking powder in them. Baking soda turned them purple.
It is a funny little thing.
It's weird.
That some women who are great cooks
can't make biscuits.
Or there's just a certain something here and there that they can't make.
I can't make it.
And my mom would say that. My mom would say that I don't know anything because I don't cook anything, but I listen to these things because my ears would pick up because these things mattered to me. So my mom would say that biscuits were a bit of an art.
They are an art. I agree 100% with that.
And that they're apparently some of them are more difficult than others. But today, Amie Beth Shaver, very dear to my heart, she brought not one but 2 sacks. This is plural, full of biscuits, which are in our illustrious break room right now. I've already eaten 2. And then, of course, Matt, the producer, brought Krispy Kremes. On top of that, I've already eaten 2. And so, I am sitting here. It's not even Thanksgiving yet. And I'm already full. But this is the stuff that we have to do in order to give ourselves the energy and just a little bit of happiness before we start discussing the very corrupt nature of the American political process these days. It feels like we have become a third world country.
It indeed does. So you put some tweets out that were very good and very spot on. And you talked about just the steal and we're going to have a pause on voting. And I noticed that several people were saying the same things. And it does feel like we've become a third world country. I don't know how in the United States of America in 2022 that we do not know how to count ballots within an evening. Okay.
Can't pull it up. America has talent, can count millions of votes in a commercial break. But you know what? We can't count these ballots. I guess they don't have enough fingers and toes.
They must not.
In order to do this in Maricopa County, in Arizona. way out there in Arizona.
It feels like it right now, though, don't it?
Well, out there in Arizona, the inability to count there. You have the same thing that is going on in Colorado. And so that people will know, this will be aired, obviously, later. And so some of what we say may prove to be inaccurate. We don't know.
We want to be wrong.
We want to be wrong. But so at the time of the recording of this particular episode, it is the day after the November 8 election. And excuse me, the producer is waving at me and telling me it's 2 days later, whatever it is. So we're a couple of days after the fact, and time flies when you're having fun or not much fun at all, or when you're traveling, as was the case with me. But so just bear that in mind as you listen, that we're time stamping this, and so the date today is the 10th. So by the time this airs, this stuff is going to shake out. But as the way it looks at the moment, it looks like we're seeing an effort to prevent Kari Lake from becoming the governor of Arizona. And it feels like we're following the pattern that Democrats have followed since 2020, which is when it looks like we're going to lose, we stop all the counting. We then tell everybody, don't try this at home, everyone. This is very complicated. We still have all kinds of uncounted mail-in ballots. And, it feels to me like Kari Lake should have won this in a landslide, but all of a sudden the counting has become extremely complicated. And, of course, Katie Hobbs, the incumbent, governor of Arizona, she also oversees the election process. She refused to recuse herself from that role. And yes, that all looks highly, highly suspicious.
It was astounding. And it seems that it also follows a pattern that when someone who is as brave as Kari Lake is, and they tried this with DeSantis, but they couldn't make it happen because he is so strong.
Yeah.
And he looked them in the face throughout his first 4 years and just stood them down. Like, that's the best you've got.
Yeah.
Kari Lake is doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that the pattern is if somebody like Trump is willing to say, that's ridiculous, and stand up to them, then it becomes their personal mission to destroy that person. So stop the voting until we figure out the right percentage so it looks less suspicious, so that maybe it's 4,703 votes that we need to overcome our...
That's what it feels like.
Slight gap. And so you watch that and you think, y'all really think we're a bunch of dumb idiots, don't you?
Yeah.
But I find it very interesting.
They know they let's go to our commercial break.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
Welcome into the Larry Alex Taunton Show. Larry, we talked about food a while ago, and we may need some to get through what happened on Tuesday night and Wednesday morning with the election in the United States.
We may need some pot brownies.
He said them. That's Larry at. No, I mean, really, what's your assessment of what happened?
I'm angry, Amie Beth, and we want to be clear of the timing, that we're talking right now, because by the time this airs, there will, some time will elapse. It is now November 10th. We're a couple of days post-election. We still are having counts going on in Arizona. We have counts going on in Colorado. America's Got Talent can count millions and millions of ballots in a commercial break. But our federal and state and local governments can't count ballots in days, apparently. I think that what's going on is we're seeing a lot of corruption in American politics. And for those of you who are listening and think that this is just conspiracy theory here, you need to listen carefully. We saw going into this election in the days leading up to it. In fact, I I took screenshots. Let me see if I can find them here of several headlines going into the election. Here they are. CBS News, why the 2020 midterm election results may not be known right away. NPR, be patient. This election is probably going to go on a while. Vox, we won't know all the midterm results on election night. That's normal. It's normal, ladies and gentlemen, since 2020.
Yeah, it's not normal.
It's not normal. ABC News, a red mirage or an artificial GOP vote lead will likely reoccur Tuesday, but early election night results may not indicate final tallies and why that's okay. So it feels to me like the DNC has given their marching orders to the media, prepare the public for delayed results in those elections where we're likely to lose in a fair vote. Right. So for instance, what's happening between Katie Hobbs and Carrie Lake. I personally am of the view, just expressing my opinion, that Carrie Lake probably has legitimately won this in a landslide. But Katie Hobbs is the incumbent in Arizona. She has not recused herself from overseeing election results. So she's in charge of the election where she has obvious motivation to rig the results. I mean, she should have recused herself. She refuses to do that. So now all of a sudden we're seeing delays of days, and we're still hearing that it may take yet longer to get the results. Now, what I think is going on is we're seeing banana republic kind of politics. And why I feel anger over this, Amie Beth, is it's not just simply anger at what I believe is Democrat shenanigans. It is anger that Republicans, in my view, still don't get it.
Yes.
Meaning I think a lot of us were blindsided by the kind of corruption that we know was factually reported. We have video evidence of voter fraud in many states, in many cases, during the 2020 presidential election. So we were all kind of caught off guard by that. And I think it's because Americans generally believe in their institutions and trust their institutions. But after 2020, no one should have been caught off guard by this. In other words, we now have been given a heads up that this is what Democrats are prepared to do. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And yet it seems to me that what Republicans decided to do was, you know what? We're going to campaign harder. We're going to spend more money on ads. We're going to hold more rallies. This is not what Democrats do. If you noticed in 2020, Biden barely campaigned. The joke was that he was hiding in his basement while Trump is hosting these massive rallies. Carrie Lake, the same thing in Arizona this election cycle, is she was hosting these huge rallies while Katie Hobbs was doing virtually nothing. And the polling data indicated that Carrie Lake was ahead, indicated that Trump was ahead, indicated a quote unquote red wave. And we saw it on election night in 2020. And then suddenly the votes stopped being counted. You remember that around 8 p.m.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, just all of a sudden the vote stopped across the country.
Yeah.
And then the next morning we're told Joe Biden won.
Right.
Now, I'm angry because those same tactics are being used again here, and Republicans don't seem to get it. They don't understand.
No.
It's like Lucy is holding the football
and
saying to Charlie, I promise this time I won't move the ball.
That's right.
And Charlie says to himself, I can trust Lucy. I'm sure I can trust her. And then, he, again whiffs it and ends up on his back. I feel like that's what's happening here because what Democrats have done is that they target the levers of power. They go out and while the rallies are being held by Republicans, Democrats who care nothing at all for the will of the people, they have targeted election laws. And so when we're talking about election rigging here, I want to be clear what I'm talking about. In some cases, we're talking about genuine corruption. In other cases, we're talking about them working at changing election law.
Yes.
So that something becomes legal, but is clearly unethical, like ballot harvesting. We know they're doing this in a very big way. We have this on record. We also know that, during the pandemic, they used the pandemic to say, well, people don't need to come in and vote.
That's right.
It all needs to be done by, mail-in ballot, which means that there's no one there to personally identify that you are who you are. Eric Metaxas reported on Twitter that when he went to vote on Tuesday of this week, he went in and he said they did not ask for his identification, which they're supposed to in New York.
Right.
And so he pointed out to the lady, why did you not ask for my ID? And she said, are you a Republican? I mean, she wanted to identify him and who he was. This is the kind of Project Veritas has uncovered, as they do these conversations with election officials who are declaring that they're up to no good. So before somebody, decides to tweet me or fire off an email suggesting that this is conspiracy theory, this is not theory. This is fact. We know this is happening. And if you're one of those people out there who wants to try to tell me that this sort of stuff doesn't happen, just turn off the TV right now, turn off your radio, turn off your iPod. I cannot reason with an idiot. I mean, that's just simply the way I feel. The late former governor of the state of Alabama, Albert Brewer, who it was my great privilege. You probably met him and knew him as well.
I had a class with him.
Alabama history. I had him for one of the best classes I ever had. You're in a class
Fascinating.
of 13 to 15 people with a former governor who tells you all of these inside stories. But one of the stories I remember him telling me, Governor Brewer, who was he was dear to me. He wrote me a beautiful recommendation for a job I was applying for. Anyway, that's another matter. But Governor Brewer, I remember him telling me that his party, he was a Democrat, so bear this in mind. He was a lifelong Democrat, but he was an honest man. He was a man of integrity. And I remember him telling me that in the 1968 election that the Democrats cheated and cheated and cheated. And he said, Larry, they took whole voting machines. He was talking specifically in Texas. He said this when LBJ was, was running for the presidency. He said they took whole voting machines and dumped them into into rivers, lake. A liver is a combination of a river and a lake.
Right.
Into rivers, lakes, and ponds. Just dumped whole voting machines. Now, this is a Democrat who's telling you he knows this happened. And I want to be clear, Albert Brewer did not approve. He was a man who respected our institutions. He respected the will of the people and would never approve of something like that. But he knew that it happened. He knew that these things were going on. And that's in 1968. If you think that that's not going on now, if you think that the people who would burn your cities, who would sexualize your children, who would do sex change, gender transition surgeries, irreversible on children, that people like this will not rig elections, you are naive or stupid or both. Because these things are going on, and they're going on a massive scale. And listen, I had Steve Cortez sitting right there not very long ago, and a week or two ago. And Steve, I love Steve. Steve is a senior Trump advisor, and he is a clever guy. And Steve, going into the election, was much more optimistic than I am. And I asked Steve, he thought it would be a red wave, and I want to believe that's true, but I'm much more cynical about this than Steve is. Let's just say that Steve is less jaded by the world perhaps than I am. But I just felt like Democrats are going to cheat their way to multiple victories. In Georgia, we've been seeing this a lot, in the state of Georgia. But again, a lot of this is being done with mail-in ballots. We have to get to, I was talking with Steve today, and he's absolutely right about this. We have to get to the place where there are massive election reforms. And those reforms involve no mail-in ballots except, in cases, and this is, of course, the way it used to be, in cases of, let's say, military service, or you're in the foreign service, or, diplomatic service. But otherwise, you have to be there in person.
Yes.
And you have to show your ID, or you do not vote. And I believe that a lot of these polls that we're seeing where it says right now, for instance, right now they're reporting that, I checked it just before we went on air, that Katie Hobbs is ahead in Arizona, like 50.5% to 49.5%. I do not believe that. I believe these splits that we're seeing all over the place that would suggest the country is almost evenly divided. I don't believe the country is evenly divided. The inventor of Twitter said that Twitter was created in order to give the impression that the left had a much larger voice in the marketplace of ideas than, in fact, they actually do. He admitted this, that they turn a few knobs here and there. We all know that this is the case in the way that Twitter has been managed, and that Elon Musk at least promises that he's going to change this. We'll find out whether or not he actually does. I haven't, frankly, noticed any difference as yet in this. But that Twitter was created, again, to give a minority, a radical minority, a much larger cultural voice. And in order to give people like you and me the impression, wow, I had no idea that there were all these transgender people out there. Wow, they dominate the culture. I had no idea that all these Marxists, well, the fact is there aren't.
That's right.
And I think that that's what we're seeing. That same kind of thing is what's being done in some of our polling, in some of this election data, in some of the reports on the voting that's taking place. Democrats are releasing, piecemeal votes from blue counties, for instance, in order to give that false impression. When I think, and again, I'm just offering my opinion, I think Katie Hobbs has been steamrolled. But right now they're suppressing the Kari Lake vote, and they're trying to get a read on how many votes they need from mail-in ballots in order to pull out a Katie Hobbs victory. So as we sit right here, and by the time people listen to this, you'll be able to tell me. In other words, I won't hold this show back to save myself from any embarrassment. If it proves that I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I want to be wrong. But as I'm sitting here today right now, I think that in the next day or two, we will be told it's final. We can report from the CNN desk that Katie Hobbs has pulled out a squeaker of a victory in Arizona. I just don't believe they're going to let Kari Lake win. I do not believe that's what's going to happen. But again, I hope I'm wrong.
So a couple of things. I find it interesting and agree with you that when it comes to the left, they had to make us feel like we are less than and we're the crazy ones. We're election deniers.
Yes.
I heard that again in several reports, that we were election deniers because we questioned the, election. And then I'm like, okay, Stacey Abrams didn't concede. Like, it's all over the board. If you're a progressive, it's okay. But if you're a conservative,
Hillary Clinton in 2016 was everywhere saying that it was a fraudulent election.
She did. And so you notice that. So they have to label. But I also find it interesting that going back for years, the left changes the language of what they wish to change.
Yes.
And they change definitions of what they wish to change. And so we're seeing it here. We saw it beginning, I think, with abortion, and they started changing the language of choice.
Well, and it's actually changing in your dictionaries
And
too.
it's changing.
The word fascism, I've noticed, has changed from when I was taught what fascism is to now. When you look in an actual dictionary, they've changed the definition to try to make it sound like a MAGA hat wearing type.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yep, this is happening.
And I'm looking around.
A man or a woman.
Yeah, a man or a woman. Like, and then you laugh. And I was thinking about this on the way here today. I thought, well, this is really funny. I'm reading Abigail Schreier's book on transgender craze and how it's seducing our children, especially our daughters.
Sounds riveting.
I mean, it is. She's a beautiful writer, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's unbelievable that
no offense.
No, not at all. But Chris is like, are you really reading that book? I'm like, yes, it's actually very good. But that language change that they're using is astounding, but also the change in definitions. And yet the irony is, this is just an aside, I'm thinking, transgenderism, you have to know what a woman is or a man is to know that you're not that. So they're easily, you can punch back, but nobody ever does.
Yeah.
And then if you do, like Carrie Lake did, like Trump did, they will destroy you.
Yeah.
They cannot afford to let Carrie Lake win. They can't do it.
No, because she's smart.
She's smart. She's beautiful. Darn her. And so she can't have any of these things because she's not afraid of them. And they make bank when we stay afraid. And so if you are a conservative, I think one of the things that we need to do is reread Rules for Radicals if you haven't read it. Go back and read it again. And Saul Alinsky's book, it's excellent. It's short.
Excellent in an insidious way.
In an insidious way,
not in a Alinsky
wonderful.
Was an awful human being.
He was a terrible guy.
But
He dedicated it to Satan.
Yes, he did. He dedicated it to Lucifer. And if when we say it's excellent, we mean that if you want to understand the playbook the left is following, this is a book you want to read because it's all about the kind of things that we're seeing. But anyway, continue.
Well, and then we have to, and you said something a minute ago, and that is we want to believe the best in our institutions. And I may have mentioned this before, but Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book, and it was really good in its insight. We have a hard time believing wrongly about people. We have a hard time believing something's bad. We have a hard time saying, wait a second, I've got a problem here. I don't believe that. We want to believe that everything is okay. We want to believe that this is right and just and good. And so when we're the election deniers and we're saying, hang on a second, then we're the outliers.
Well, it's...
And it shouldn't be that way, but it is.
This leads into a kind of another topic that may or may not interest you, but it was a conversation Lori and I were having yesterday because Lori often says to me that she feels like she gets down on herself and she says, I'm naive. I mean, I wish I weren't naive. I feel like I'm naive. I feel like I'm naive about people. Sometimes I realize this person was doing me harm or something like that, and I didn't see it coming or this kind of thing. And I was trying to tell Lori, listen, this is to your credit. I am so glad I'm not married to a cynical woman. I'm so glad that's not the case. I'm glad that you see the best in people. This is to your credit. And the way I think of that is a little bit like this, and you'll see where I'm going with this, or at least I hope you do. One of the great compliments in the Bible, I think, is when Jesus says to Nathanael, he says to Nathanael that he's without guile. To be without guile is to be without that cynicism. When you're without guile, you're a person. You're not involved in palace intrigue. You're not a manipulator. Nathanael is a guy without guile. What you see is what you get, and what a wonderful compliment that Jesus pays him. And then in Luke 16, and I think we've said this in a previous show, but in Luke 16, Jesus says that I forget the exact wording, but he says basically this, that believers are not as shrewd.
Right. Same
They're
thought.
not as shrewd as unbelievers. And he's telling the story of the dishonest manager who outwits his employer when his employer tells him he's going to fire him. And Jesus says, something to the effect of, the sons of light are not as shrewd in dealing with their own generation as are unbelievers. So unbelievers tend to be not without, they tend to have guile. They tend to be people who are characterized by a kind of shrewdness that believers often don't possess.
Yes.
this is to the credit of the believing. And as I was explaining to Lori, this is my own feeling, because I feel like in a lot of ways I'm not guileless. I would love to say that I am, but maybe I am in some regards. But I kind of think of them as categories, as different silos. That there are areas of your life where, okay, I'm naive. The bar chart says very naive here, not very naive here, very naive here, not very naive here, and so on. Because to lose that naivete, I think it generally means you've had to be the victim of somebody on that particular subject, or at least a witness to it. And what I mean by that is this: for instance, to be without guile on, like for instance, in our previous interview, we were talking to Ari Jacob, and I will never again be naive about media interviews. I've done enough of them. Early on, I was naive. I assumed that they were honest, and when I would do an interview, that they really were interested in me or the topic that they had invited me on the show to discuss. And I have since learned that is often not the case. I've since learned that sometimes it's a setup. So I am not guileless on that anymore. And that's because I've suffered from it. I've been the victim of dishonest journalists. And we could say that there are a variety of other topics where this relates to. It might be that you're guileless on sexuality. You're guileless on any number of subjects. I think the American people, by and large, are guileless. That is to say, naive about elections. So that as we're sitting here, I just got a text from a South American woman who wants me to take a keen interest in some of the elections that are extremely corrupt in South America, specifically in her own country of Brazil, which I have a great deal of interest at what's going on there. And she says that what's gone on there is what's going on in the United States. Now, you see, she's not naive. She's a Brazilian. She's seen this movie before. She knows what's happening in the United States because she's witnessed it in her own country, you see. The American people haven't, well, they have been victims of it. They just don't always know. Many are still not aware of what took place in 2020. But Americans still trust their institutions to a degree that they should not, unfortunately.
Right.
And the result is that in order for us to lose that naivete, we almost have to be victims. You understand what I'm saying?
100%. And here's how. I ran for office in our House district years ago. I made the runoff. The idea that I had to explain to people that all is not well in our capital city, that we may be in a conservative state, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these people are your friends or that they care about you or they care about the legislation that they appear to support. That is not the case. It is very corrupt. It was unbelievably difficult to explain that to people when it was over. Like my eyes had been opened. So that we live in a state where people are saying, oh, our elections are clean. No, they're not. Yeah. But the idea that
and you're talking about the state of Alabama.
And I'm talking about the state of Alabama. I loved doing that. I loved the education I received by running for office. But the naivete gone. Yeah. Because I saw it for what it was. But it is very true that we still remain in that state of we are called to be like children, but that's after faith in the Lord as we are tender before Him and relying on Him for everything. That doesn't mean that we can't punch back. That doesn't mean that we can't be on our guard. That doesn't mean that we can't be sure. It doesn't mean any of those things. We should be. Yeah. But we're not. And so I feel that everything will be crumbling down and we'll be standing in a smoldering ruin and say, what happened? And we're like, we wake up.
And see, and this is what I'm talking about when I say this. In the case of the 2020 election, it's to the credit of much of the American public that they didn't assume corruption.
That's right.
That they didn't just immediately,
they expected the best.
They expected the best. But there comes a point where I think it becomes sinful, where listen, The first time around, you didn't know any better. Now you do. Now you know how they play this game. And as I say, former Governor Albert Brewer telling me, of the cheating in the 68 election. The cheating continues now. It just continues in different forms. We have, I don't know if you saw this in my Twitter feed, but I was contacted by Dr. Robert Epstein. He shot me an email or a text or something and said, "Hey, Larry, can you help me get this research out that I've done on Google?" And it's too complicated for me to summarize here, but suffice it to say, Robert Epstein is a liberal, self-described liberal, voted for Hillary Clinton. So he's not a believer, but I think very highly of Robert Epstein. Robert Epstein is a top-notch scholar, former editor-in-chief of Psychology Today, Harvard PhD, a team of researchers. They've been looking at the algorithms of Google and the way Google works. And he says, listen, the elections are rigged. They're rigged. And he says, and the way they do it is with something he calls ephemeral. I think this is the way he describes it. Ephemeral influences or something like that. In other words, it's like skywriting. It's there for a moment but disappears, and thus it's not really traceable.
Oh, wow.
But what they do is if you type in, you have what do they call it? Auto suggest?
Yes.
So you start to type in, let's say, Amie Beth Shaver as and Google maybe prioritizes, because Google knows you're a conservative, it prioritizes negative responses on you. So the first page is, let's say, your Wikipedia page where Matt and I have gone and have trashed you and, called you all kinds of, dirty names. And it prioritizes that. We didn't do that, by the way. But it
she prioritizes how to make
that. But she knows how to make biscuits. And it prioritizes maybe articles that are negative about you, all this kind of stuff for the first couple of pages, so that people can't even, it takes them a while. But but see, it's an ephemeral, meaning it's only there for a moment, and it's hard to trace. It has influenced the way you are perceived. Now, if you type in, let's say, Joe Biden and then hit images, they're all going to be stunning images of him, almost with a halo. And you're going, wow, I can't find that image of him, that went viral on Twitter, where he was walking into a wall, didn't seem to know where he was. And it's because it has prioritized images to put, and I'm using these as an example. These are made up examples in order to influence your thinking. But then we type in, say, one on Trump, and they're all goofy looking pictures, let's say, or, things that make him look very foolish or evil or something to that effect. This is what they do. And so Bob was telling me, look, that is Robert Epstein was telling me, look, we have to get this information out. So I reach out to editors at American Spectator and Daily Wire and elsewhere and say, hey, guys, it's a Sunday night. I know you really don't want to fool with this, but you need to publish this article. And finally, Daily Caller did. And the article went viral.
Wow.
It beginning on Sunday night and then continued on Monday. But I don't know that it was maybe a day late and a dollar short. You felt like this needed to come out a month ago. I was grateful, for the research. But this is the kind of thing that we're talking about, this level of, this is a kind of corruption. In other words, where big tech is involved in influencing the outcome of the election, the same way that it was in 2020 when the information about Hunter Biden was killed. I mean, This was an article by the New York Post, and it was killed by big tech so that people could not see it. And then after the election, and they say, well, Joe Biden has won, then they maybe 6 months later go,
look at that.
Look at this. It turns out this whole laptop story was true. So this is the kind of stuff that's going on. And until Republicans, until conservatives, until Christians wake up to this kind of stuff and begin not just simply, it's not about how hard you campaign.
That's right.
Katie Hobbs didn't campaign. Gretchen Whitmer, what's her name?
Whitmer.
She barely campaigned. Biden barely campaigned in 2020. And it's because they knew the fix was in. Mm-hmm. They didn't need to do that. And I think Republicans, they just continue to be naive about this. Or in some cases, maybe a Mitch McConnell, let's say, just don't care. But the fact is, if the football game is rigged, it doesn't matter. It's not about you going back and practicing harder. Until you address the integrity of the officiating, the outcome is predetermined before you ever take the field. You cannot win in that kind of situation. And it's time that conservatives wake up to this. And if you're one of these people who says, well, I'm just not political, or I'm retired, or I just don't think Christians should be involved in these kinds of things, God calls you to care for the least of these. And I'm here to tell you, if you don't think that the outcome of these elections don't have a ripple effect for the unborn, for the widowed, for the orphaned, for the common people of not just this country, but around the world, you have to wake up to this, because it absolutely matters. These are moral issues. And what kind of country do you want to leave for your children, for your grandchildren? Or do you just simply say, look, I don't plan to be on this earth that much longer. I don't care. Well, you need to care, because I think the Lord cares.
I found a wonderful quote by a guy that I think we both follow on Twitter, and you may know him, Owen Strachan.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a wonderful, to everything that you just said, he says...
Provost at seminary.
Yes, amazing. Hey, Christian, holding back evil is good. Standing against decline is good. Preserving what is left of civilization is good. Speaking for the voiceless is good. Protecting religious liberty is good. Defending the free market is good. Securing national borders is good. Saving unborn babies is good. Preserving marriage and family is good. Stop apologizing. Depend on Christ. Keep standing. Don't quit until God turns the lights out.
Boom.
I was like, okay, all of that.
Yeah, and yet he gets trashed a lot. We follow each other on Twitter, and it's interesting. We've exchanged a couple of DMs. He will get trashed a lot by the David Frenches of the world, as somehow of the Russell Moores, as though somehow him taking a position like that is not Christian.
It's not holy enough. I mean, it's like, who are you to speak to these things?
Yeah, exactly.
We are the experts, you dummy.
Yes.
You're like, no, have you ever heard him preach or speak?
And that's why I defend NRB. That, NRB, some of you listen to our show on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube. This is aired on DirecTV. This show is aired on DirecTV, and you've seen people like I think it was Phil Vischer or David French, one of those two, who have trashed NRB by saying that NRB has gone all in on the Republican Party, this kind of stuff. I invite you now. I will debate either of them on these kinds of issues. I would relish the opportunity to discuss these issues with them, because I believe the position they take is antithetical to the gospel. Mm-hmm. It is antithetical to the gospel, because they are de facto supporters of an evil regime, of an evil agenda.
That's right.
And so we take the position that we take here, not because, listen, my political views are not determined for me by the Republican Party. They're determined for me by my Christian views, which are anchored in the gospel as articulated in His Word, in Scripture. And so where I disagree with the Republican Party or any party, or anything for that matter, it's to the degree that it differentiates from my understanding of God's holy word. So that matters to me very much. And part of that is standing in the gap. And you're standing in the gap not because I'm trying to preserve some way of life per se. It's because we are trying to preserve unborn life. We're trying to preserve opportunity for our children. We're trying to preserve religious freedom, political freedom, freedom of speech. These things, I believe, have their anchor in a Christian worldview. And by golly, I'm going to defend them to my dying breath because I believe that's what my calling is. I believe that's what my God would have me do.
That's right.
So as you can tell, I'm pretty amped up over this today. Could be because of the Krispy Kreme donuts and the biscuits today. The combination smears to a bit.
It's exactly as we planned. But you are exactly right. You know, I was thinking.
I think when I went to the bathroom, you dropped a little speed, you know, into my coffee this morning.
Maybe, or your water bottle. Who knows? Who knows what happened? No, you're exactly right. And I think it's interesting. I've been listening over the past couple of days, and then also reflecting on the Marxist theology that we've talked about over the last several months. And I'm thinking, you know, it's interesting because somebody invoked the name of Karl Marx yesterday, and I thought, you know, he saw a problem and he filled it in with his own religion, and it's very pathetic that there are people who claim Christianity or claim religion and they're following that. They're following that ideology and they're asking that we do the same.
Yes.
And this is mind-boggling to me that you would be against those who would support life, which, by the way, I would like to remind everybody, you have to be alive first to do any of these things.
Yeah.
To defend liberty, to defend marriage, to defend our borders. All of those things are done to preserve. But I also heard something excellent by Jeff Myers, and this is back in the summer. I drive, I listen a lot. He said, we're voting for the people who are, we're not holding our nose and voting for those, you know, we've often said, well, I'm just going to hold my nose and vote. This is terrible. It's gross. No, what we're doing is we're voting for those who will do the least amount of evil. Yeah. This is what we're for. Is for the least amount of evil. And whoever's going to do that, I am for you. Yeah. Beginning with being alive first. Yeah. And then we go from there. But you're right. It is all about the gospel. That is what informs our belief. It's really simple. We've made it hard. It's not hard.
No, it isn't hard. And I mean, listen, the arguments that you see some of these type make are inane. They will say, I mean, honestly, they're biblically illiterate arguments.
Yes,
they're
agree.
arguments like this, but they sound so sophisticated that what we're looking for in our political leaders, and then they'll lay out the qualifications, essentially the qualifications of an elder in the church.
Right.
To which I respond, there is a difference between our secular leaders and our church leaders. Secondly, what do you make of Esther appealing to King Xerxes on behalf of a pagan king who, by the way, went through a host of virgins in a single night to determine which one he was going to marry and make his, in other words, pagan to his core.
Right.
Yet Esther appeals to him because Mordecai, appeals to her to do so. She goes to the king and tells them of Haman's plot against the Jews. She asks him to intervene. He does. How are we to, I mean, God has used pagan kings throughout history and the appeal to defend his own people. And they appeal to them. Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus. I mean, we have so many biblical examples of this. Paul appealing to Caesar.
Well, how about Ruth and Boaz, and she's going in to unfold his bed garment and said, "Don't let anybody know you're in here."
This is a family show.
Then this is Jesus is in that line. Yeah. Okay, but it is so hypocritical.
Yeah, for sure.
It is
Bathsheba is in the line of Bathsheba.
Hello. I would like to talk to her someday. Anyway, so
I think she was a pretty remarkable woman.
I think she probably was.
Yeah.
But it is unbelievably hypocritical that they're like, unless it's Jesus.
Yeah, of course.
I can't vote for them, and it's unless it's Jesus.
And the result is they end up supporting they become de facto supporters of gender transition surgeries, of Marxism, of every kind of evil, drag queen shows for preschoolers.
That's right.
Of every kind of evil under the sun, because they're that pompous. They're that pompous, they cannot see the forest for the trees. I am sick of these people. Again, donuts and biscuits, something.
We found the magic for Larry, everyone.
It's like,
yay!
It's like Mentos and Coca-Cola.
That was very fun, by the way. You remember when you were in high school, you were like, look at this.
and then shooting
Anyway.
that off. Yeah.
Anyway, Larry,
absolutely.
today,
Apparently,
everyone.
that's what's happened today. But as you can see, I'm a little amped up today.
But you're right. I mean, the bottom line is you're right. And you know what? Most people are sick of the pomp and
Yes.
circumstance that they are issuing to us as if they've issued
And
edicts
some of these Mitch
straight
McConnell-like
from the
leaders.
Lord. Come on, Christian, fellow warrior, wake up.
Let me throw this out there. You had said that I don't know if it's during the show or during the break, but that Chris had been, your husband Chris, Dr. Chris, had been listening to our discussions on the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. And by the way, those articles, which I published, a series of 4 with the Daily Wire, are now available for free on our website, the Larry Alex Taunton website, LarryAlexTaunton.com. You can find them all there. Daily Wire has a paywall. I don't. I just ask you to support the work. But what we're talking about happening here fits into that discussion.
Indeed.
Because what we're seeing happening, for instance, in South America, Venezuela, socialist, it fell some time ago to the socialists. Colombia, an up-and-coming democracy, fell to the socialists, the Marxists, in May of this year. Now Brazil, all of these look like very suspicious elections. And by the way, the chosen man in Brazil to follow, suddenly his name's gone out of my head, but the previous Brazilian president, he's a World Economic Forum guy. He's a handpicked guy. Their candidate won there. It's the same kind of tactics you're seeing in American government, meaning I think the World Economic Forum is at a higher level. This is part of the discussion of what's going on here, and it's very, very real. And I'm still kind of, there's more to that World Economic Forum discussion to be had. I know I wrote the 4 articles. I'm planning to go to Davos at their annual gathering in Switzerland in January. If viewers like you make that possible and support the work of Fixed Point Foundation, that's what I plan to do. And also monitoring pretty closely some of the things that are going on in South America that relate to this. But these are globalists,
Yes, they are.
who are pushing this, and hence the reason that there are 2 great enemies of the globalist agenda. The first is the Christian faith.
Amen.
The first is the Christian faith, because the Christian faith, Christians are by definition rebels. And I'm really kind of quoting loosely Francis Schaeffer when I say this in How Should We Then Live? He says something to the effect of that the Roman government immediately identified Christians as enemies of the state, and they did because no totalitarian or authoritarian regime can tolerate a people who say that they have an absolute universal standard by which all men and their governments are to be judged. And see, the Christian faith does, because we say that the state is not our highest law. We adhere to a law that is above that of the state, and we judge the state according to those laws,
Right.
According to God's laws. It was on this basis that America was founded, because the Declaration of Independence is not appealing to British law. It's saying, listen, we know this is the law of the land in Britain. We just think they're immoral laws. Why? Because we appeal to a higher law. The abolitionists did the same thing. Law of the land says that slavery is legal, but we appeal to God's law. God's law says these are illegitimate laws. Well, you see, totalitarian, authoritarian regimes can't tolerate people like that because they're always they're potential subversives, and that's why in Pliny the Younger's letter to Trajan, the Emperor Trajan, very famous correspondence, he's writing to, and this is early 2nd century AD. He writes to Trajan and he says, listen, I need your counsel on how we are to judge these Christians. He says, we place your image in front of them and we tell them to worship it, because we're told that Christians can't do that. They can only worship their own God. And if they worship the image, then we turn them loose. If they refuse to do it, we ask them a second time to worship it. If they then refuse to do it, we execute them. And he says, is this appropriate procedure? And Trajan basically says, carry on. Sounds to me like you're following a wise policy. The state creates a kind of pantheon of gods where it says, we'll tolerate Christianity, provided it's a Christianity that isn't threatening. It's a toothless Christianity. It's a Christianity that doesn't condemn genderism. It's a Christianity that doesn't condemn Marxism. It's a Christianity that doesn't condemn the sexualization of children. If you guys gather on Sunday mornings and it's this milk toast kind of, we tolerate that. We'll place your God in our pantheon of other gods. We'll have all of them on display, provided that all of you acknowledge the state as the absolute. You see, so the World Economic Forum is fundamentally anti-Christian. So that's one thing that they're against. The second thing is patriotism, love of one's own country. So hence the reason you see all the negativity that if you are you're a patriot, you're a nationalist, and therefore a fascist. You're just, you just as well wear a Nazi, armband. Hence the attacks on American history, this toppling of statues, the retelling, the revising of American history, and the attacks on just this year, the 4th of July celebrations, the mocking of, say songs like Lee Greenwood's. What's the name of the song?
God Bless the USA.
God Bless the USA. Boy, that's a double whammy right there. It's patriotism and Christianity all rolled into one. So these are things they simply can't tolerate. So these are the things that are the efforts to destroy them under the acids of cynicism, to reinterpret them as negatively as possible. And where in the world are these things to be found most of all? The United States. So the United States is the keystone over the doorway that they must destroy. Because so long as the United States remains firm, as long as the United States remains red versus blue, the globalist agenda cannot move forward. And so I'm just putting that on the radar of people. We won't go into all that detail here today, but I'm just putting that out there for you to help you see and pay attention to what's happening here, because all of these threads, they connect.
They absolutely do, and I appreciate you connecting the dots.
Connect, not threads. Anyway,
you do. You've connected the dots, and I think that's very important, because I think once you see the whole picture, once you see the forest and the trees and then the forest, you go, oh, this makes sense, which is an even greater impetus to then go, no, thank you. Yep. With all that we are, with all that we have, because it is right.
I don't think the left, pardon me, Amie Beth, I don't think the left really, I mean, there are many on the left who do because it's their lifestyle, but I don't think the real, shall we say, those in the think tank on the left necessarily care anything about gender transition surgeries and this kind of thing. What they want, which came out of the Frankfurt School, which I noticed you were casually throwing around in a Latimer House luncheon very impressively, the Frankfurt School. But what came out of the Frankfurt School is a way to destroy the United States. They decided was through sex education in schools, because they decided that Christianity was the core. I said this in one of these articles on the World Economic Forum for Daily Wire. I quoted Neil Ferguson, the Harvard historian, Oxford PhD, who wrote a book called Civilization, the West and the Rest, who is, by the way, an atheist. He quotes a Chinese scholar who says, we've discovered that the strength of your culture is the Christian faith. Well, the Frankfurt School discovered that too, and they said that the way to destroy it, they decided, in order to make America receptive to Marxist ideas, we have to first destroy the Christian faith. And the way to do that is through sex education in schools, because if you can destroy America's fundamental ethic, starting with their children, then you can destroy the whole culture. That's the crack in the concrete, which you can then slip a crowbar into and bust up the whole thing. And see, that's what this is about. It's about this. If you call it good, we're going to call it evil. If you call it evil, we're going to call it good. If you call it man, we'll call it woman. You call it woman, we'll call it man. That's what this is all about. You see, it's to destroy your cultural touchstones, your political heroes, your historical heroes, we're going to destroy them. Your religion, going to destroy them. Your ethics, we're going to destroy them. Everything that you hold dear, we're going to subvert in order to make you susceptible to, more receptive to a new ethic, and that ethic will be the one that we, the state, will decide for you. That's what's going on. Boy, I tell you what,
and because you're on fire, we're going to just stop right there.
Krispy Kreme, perfect timing.
Okay. Krispy Kreme and donuts. Donuts and biscuits.
And coffee.
Shazam.
Loads of coffee.
Now we know. You know what? Great discussion. Look forward to next time. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been the Larry Alex Taunton Show. We will see you next time.
Turn out the lights. The party's over. They say that all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful for the standing ovation, but there will be no encore for today's performance. Please exit the building in an orderly fashion. Thank you.
Honey, can we leave now?